Recording. Hi, I'm Jazz, and this is another interview for the Bardic Gateway. Today I'm going to be talking to Max Williams. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Max. I write about games. I'm also an indie game developer from many angles, writing, music, programming, the whole shtick.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking a bit about how theatre and games cross over and how these industries compare in terms of getting into them and what you can learn and potentially take from one to the other. So the first thing I wanted to ask was, how did you first get into writing about gaming?
It's one of those ones that I've always hated it as the answer that I basically just fell into it, but I basically just fell into it. I literally just saw a job one day that said, we want someone to write about games, and I went, that's a thing people can do, that's a thing I can do. And it went from there. And now I do some freelance for websites and gaming magazines who are great people to write for and are always looking for people to pitch stuff to them. So yeah, it's a good way to do it.
We spoke a bit about before this interview how like gaming and acting are almost similar in a way, in that you are putting yourself into the shoes of a character. How much do you think that the narrative styles of theatre and gaming are similar, and where do you think they really differ?
I think, yeah, from the perspective of, say, someone who is acting in theatre and has to put themselves into the shoes of that one character for a long time through rehearsal and those sorts of things, it is it's gaming almost offers a nice insight into having that amount of time and focusing on how the character will often be feeling in themselves, as well as interacting with, the world and the rest of the cast. So as a medium, gaming offers a lot more introspection for a character, as you might have as an actor trying to come to grips with a character.
In terms of what this does to how we approach writing characters, how do you think that affects it? How much do you think that makes it kind of an ethical dilemma, because you are in their shoes, you are kind of taking responsibility for their actions in a way you're not if you're watching, Fight Club?
I think it is definitely one of the strengths of gaming narratives, is that it can give you responsibility for the character and make you question those sorts of things. So I know several people who they'll play games where they have an opportunity to do the good thing or do the bad thing, and even though they're curious about doing the bad thing to see what the results are, they always find themselves having to do the good thing because it just feels too wrong. And I think yeah, it's definitely an interesting way to analyze those sorts of questions and start thinking about things from an ethical angle, or from a speculative angle, because you are given that one character that is, for all intents and purposes, you, and then there's a whole other thing about whether or not you play according to how you think or according to how who you're playing should think. And it's an angle that no other kind of medium really has the same opportunity to go into.
I think as well, I remember even before lockdown, because these were very like not socially distanced, you would see all these things that were kind of almost trying to move what you have in gaming into real life. For example, when you could go to like I think I saw once a Murder on the Orient Express party, and it was a train. You had all these actors essentially playing the characters and putting you in the position of being one of them. I think that the instinct towards theatre and towards gaming isn't that different.
Yeah, there's definitely the so the murder mystery dinner parties, if you've ever seen or been involved in one of those, it's very, you're all playing a game, but it's also theatre because you're all given a character and you're all I can't think of any particular examples, but I've heard of them on a bigger scale where, the production might be in a building, in each different room, and the audience will go from room to room, and it will be different scenes, it will be different people they can interact with, it's a huge crossover.
How much do you think, I guess in gaming, because often it is this thing of, if you're putting yourself in the shoes of the character, you almost don't want to give someone too much of like a distinguish, this is what the character is, because for some of them you want to be able to essentially almost believe you're them, or
Mm,
sympathize with them enough to do so.
mm.
um how much do you think it's something that can be really good for a narrative to actually have this mystery around them, this leaving space for you to put yourself in their shoes?
I'm a little unusual in that I like to be given um I like to be given a role. If I play a game, I like them to tell me this is who you are and this is what they do. And maybe some of that comes down to the culpability thing we were talking about. If I'm given a choice, I like to think about it from, well, guy I am playing as would probably do this, whether or not I think that is right. Whereas the more open ended it is, the more it's kind of like, well, am I doing this now because this is what I think is right, or um, it's definitely interesting to have that element of mystery. And I know for a lot of people, the projection aspect is a big part of, it's something that gaming can offer that many things can't do, in that it can carve you your own space in the story that you can sort of fill however you want to. um, but uh, yeah, I think some and some is the best way to go. You don't want it to be a complete blank, because then you start feeling more again like you're actually watching as opposed to being part of it. Especially when you have things like, well, this character who you never see and who never has a voice, and I'm like, I'm essentially just an audience member
Yeah,
that occasionally shoots things.
I think actually that's is another thing that is very like good about both industries. We mentioned a bit before that it's that both have a very strong independent sector, and
Mm,
therefore a lot of kind of freedom in what they can make, because you don't, I mean, unless you're obviously trying to make a massive game,
mm,
you don't need a huge amount of funding to
yeah,
create your own game, just as you don't need a huge amount of funding to create your own like independent piece of theatre, providing
yeah,
with people who are like up for it and willing to work on it. And I think it's the crazy ideas that you mentioned. I think it's why both do have this slightly crazy side to them, where you can explore things in a way that would never really be an option if you were trying to apply for very specific funding, or if you were trying to make extremely commercially successful stuff.
yeah, yeah. I could be completely wrong, but I'm assuming you're familiar with the concept of game jams. Game jams are where there's usually a theme, not always, but you have a certain amount of time, and everybody goes, "I'm going to make a game in this amount of time," and it will just be whatever it will. So they're often, quite simple, because you don't have the time to go into all of those sorts of things. But I think theatre jams, that should be a thing. That would be amazing. Just like, we had this amount of time and we came up with a production, and this is what it is.
I
It would
think
be really interesting.
it doesn't get done enough. I know it gets done as it gets done in like theatre workshops a lot, because I've done a lot where
Mm,
they'll go, you've got an hour, make a
yeah,
make a 5 minute show, just do something.
yeah.
But it's definitely not something you see as much in like the main kind of stage. You see a lot of improv, which is obviously in the exact moment, but you
Mm.
don't see a huge amount where it's like, you had a day, we made a play.
Yeah. I think it would be really interesting, especially if, again, you did it based on, like, everyone is given the same concept. You can kind of group them by what they were, to see the different interpretations of that concept. I know it's very interesting in the games. I imagine it would be extremely interesting to see some theatre based minds where they take the different ideas. Yeah, I just got sidetracked.
I think for both of them though, it is such a kind of, it's a really cool mindset to be able to put yourself in, of just being like, something will be created and it doesn't necessarily have to be good. And
Yeah, yeah.
I think a lot of people, I guess, don't necessarily realize that people can make games that quickly, and
Mm,
can make games as individuals, because
mm.
obviously so many people find the tech side of it very intimidating. um and what would you say to people who are, for example, like theatre writers, about trying to kind of cross over into gaming? What are the first things that you almost would need to know if you wanted to go and make a game?
I guess it depends on whether or not you want to make it from scratch or not. Luckily, there is a lot of software out there for people to make games who aren't so savvy with programming and stuff like that. RPG Maker. I think they just announced one for the Nintendo Switch. I don't know if it's the same kind of thing. So if you're looking at it from a writing angle, there's nothing to stop you from making a game using something like that, where it's easier to put the pieces into place without having to go, oh God, I have to go and learn Python and Java and all this other stuff. So it would be really interesting to see some theatre writers approach gaming in that sense. But I think the other thing is that if you can get a programmer on board, then that's great. I'd just be really interested to see what kind of games they would turn out, like coming at it from a theatre perspective, how it be different.
On the reverse, what would you kind of say about people who are maybe interested in gaming and really enjoyed that, and potentially intimidated by theatre on the reverse? Because I realize that, yeah, it can be very kind of intimidating, the concept of like being on a stage or like putting your own work on a stage in front of a very physical present audience.
I definitely think there are some people who are writing games who would be excellent at writing theatre. So some of the artistic games and stuff in particular, while they can be visually stunning done in the game medium, I think they would be also really interesting to see done in a theatre medium, because it brings that extra human element of, you know, having the people on the stage performing in front of you, that from a connection level, I think is probably easier achieved that way. Obviously, if you are writing in gaming, then unfortunately to go and write something for theatre, you have to have people. But but you know, I think it should be done.
How much are there like people who are essentially just narrative writers for games now, and how much is it still that a lot of the time it's the programmer who also might write the dialogue and might write the story?
There's definitely a bigger scope for it these days, especially in the big companies where you have kind of like one person for every little job. Is that, yeah, you do have people who their entire part is to write the narrative. They don't have to worry about how they're going to physically make that level. They just go, nope, that's how it works. And it's the kind of thing that has definitely flourished with games becoming a bigger industry and finally getting more kind of acknowledgement. Yeah, but a lot of the time you did have one person having to do everything, and while there's people out there who still do that, if you are interested in writing narratives for games but you don't want to have to figure out how to do all the other stuff, there are opportunities. That's the thing now. It's actually a conceivable role.
And if someone wanted to do that, would they have to go and essentially, would it have to be with a larger company, would it, or are more independents getting towards a place where they're getting writers in for specific games?
There are definitely independent groups who will have, you know, one or two people who handle the writing and one or two people who handle the art. So I mentioned before the interview Lemmasoft as a network for independent game creators, where you'll go in and you'll say, hey, I can do voice acting and I can do, I don't know, script writing, and someone will go, oh, well, I'd like to take you on for the script for this thing, and I'll take that person who can do art, and it's just kind of putting people with the right skills in the same place so that they can kind of join together and create stuff. Whereas usually on their own, they would have been like, well, I can only do some of it. Yeah, but you definitely get people who are just dedicated to writing and things in places like that who can find the rest of their team, essentially.
Yes. So for people watching, could you tell them a little bit more about this essentially networking tool, address book that's online for game makers, and how they can access it and how it can be used? Because I'm sure it's something that a lot of people will be really interested in knowing exists.
I imagine there are a lot more than just Lemma, but Lemma is the one I happen to know best. It's a big old forum, a nice old-fashioned forum where you can go and say on threads, they'll go, oh, I'm looking for someone to write this thing, or I've seen a lot of them where it's an opportunity for independent developers to put voice acting in it, where they might not necessarily have been able to do it, because they can say, well, these are my characters, please send me your auditions in, and they have access to so many more people than they would have done. So Lemmasoft is definitely worth a look.
And voice acting for games is actually something I think a lot of actors don't necessarily think of doing and approaching, but actually such a cool way to play with being these really unique characters, because they're so often, like you say, kind of games are full of crazy ideas and these really intriguing characters. So it can be really good kind of opportunities as roles. What would you say differentiates how people, I guess, approach creating characters for games, and like between game characters and between theatre characters or characters in other formats?
I guess it really depends on the genre. So for a lot of games, if you have like a robust combat system and stuff like that, then you might be like, well, I need a character who can do this particular thing, so they have to have this ability, and then you might kind of reverse engineer the actual personality and character side from, they need to be able to do this because that, or I need someone who can explain to the player that this is how the world works and this is how this works. Whereas I guess from a purely narrative point, for those sorts of games or for theatre, it's a lot more about what dynamics you want to look at or what elements of a person you want to explore, and there's a lot less on kind of them having to fill a particular role or having to have a particular set of skills.
I think it's a really interesting way to start thinking about a character, is to be like, well, physically they need to get the player or the character from A to B. I think it's perhaps a good way for people to approach developing their characters sometimes. If you're struggling, be like, okay, this is the practicality.
Yeah, this is what someone needs to do who can do it, as opposed to going, these are who I have, how do I get them there? Yeah.
Kind of like how when you're trying to put something, like you say with like game jams, putting everything together really quickly makes you not get a little bit less kind of stressed about it being bad. And I think that it does help sometimes have either like this time restriction or this restriction of what this character needs to do to actually consolidate what you're working on.
Yeah, sometimes you need a good kick, that it doesn't have to be perfect and you just need it to actually function. Someone has to do the thing.
Yeah.
Something has to actually be finished.
I think completely. I think as well, it's often why you find gaming narratives potentially slightly less good on like the soliloquizing and everything, but generally quite tight in what in terms of stuff isn't there if it doesn't need to be.
Yeah. At the same time, I think, especially for someone who writes for theatre, one of the freedoms they might find if they try to write for gaming is that they're given a lot more time to actually look at things, and that it doesn't all have to be completely on, this is carrying the story. So games have a lot more opportunities for, hey, here's a side quest where you can learn about this character who, they don't get an opportunity to really do much in the main story other than their role, but here you can learn a bit more about them. So I think there's a lot of freedom in that sense.
Both also tend to look at, depending on how immersive your theatre is and how much you're doing, empty stage theatre, and how much you're doing like this is a full set kind of piece. Both have in common that to some extent you need to build a world, and you need to think about so many aspects of it that you don't have to think about when someone isn't going to be physically experiencing it. How do you think both theatre and gaming can go about world building, building this world for the audience and the characters to live in, essentially? And what do you think they could, I guess, take away from each other on that as well as character?
One of the things with that gaming could take from theatre is, I know I find sometimes when I'm playing games, I'm very tired of just the entire party being stood in a field. We just discuss which town to go to next, and taking some influence from theatre set, the way that theatre can be so creative with how it lays out scenes, because it has such a limited space to convey like such an area and things like that, would definitely be an interesting one. from the other way, yeah, I guess it's some of that, eliminating that roadblock that in theatre you might think, well, I only have this much space, so I can't think of anything too crazy, because the audience is willing to fill in the gaps. And I think even if you can't portray it as obviously as in games, if you say, oh, this is this place, people will fill it in. So in less in 3D games, but again, coming back to visual novels, for example, you'll have a lot of static images, and it might be like a picture of a house, and it tells you what the area around the house looks like, and you kind of just go, okay, that's what that looks like. You don't have to physically see it. And so many people naturally do that for games that I think you could take some confidence from that in theatre by going, you don't have to show everything, and everyone will just kind of go, all right, if you're telling me on the stage this is what this is like, then that's fine. And I guess a lot of old theatre already does that. I don't know if it's much of a hang up for people who write theatre these days, but I know it's something I would have always worried about if I wasn't so familiar with it in gaming. But
And obviously a lot of this is in independent games, and there is such like a massive independent game market, and a lot of them are like much more 2D, are much less kind of, you know, you're not expecting to have the entire world built. And I think that obviously some people think that's all gaming is, it's the ones with the whole worlds, and that's like a necessity. If someone was interested in seeing more games like this, what studios would you recommend? What games would you recommend?
I am a huge fan of a lot of Japanese games, which is where the visual novel genre flourishes in particular. So that's definitely one for a less, we built everything and there's a huge CG world and you can free roam and everything, because it can be quite stripped back and still deliver really powerful stories and really interesting characters. The other thing is, so a lot of the RPG Maker games, you can find them on Steam and stuff, will show you what people are doing who aren't big gaming studios and are just more independent people doing with essentially some of the building blocks that they're given. So when you see the vast array of games that have been made in RPG Maker, then they're all made using the same software and using a lot of the same pieces and building from that. But you get horror games, you get adventure games, you get all sorts of things built from that, and it shows that you don't have to be like EA to make a game.
I think it's the same as I guess people who don't necessarily get to see much independent theatre, like you don't have to be Cameron Mackintosh to produce a play. You don't have to create Les Mis tomorrow. It's fine. It's I think raising awareness of the more indie side of it. Do you hear about many people crossing over from games to theatre, or from theatre to games?
I haven't heard much about it. I'm sure there must be some out there, because it seems like such a natural crossing. But I couldn't say I know any offhand. The only person I know who crosses over there is me at the moment.
It's such a strange thing that it doesn't happen more, because like there are so many crossovers in terms of the approach, in terms of the creative freedom, that you can so see how they benefit from each other. Why do you think that is, just based on your own experience, that people don't necessarily think to cross the industries as much?
I guess a lot of it is, at least in my impression, theatre has always seemed like an offline thing. So I feel like people were less exposed to theatre and everything it can offer if they're hanging around in the gaming side, which tends to be very, technology based. And it's got this like weird idea that they're completely different crowds, but they don't have to be.
No, they really don't. I think as well we've obviously had a lot more online theatre this year because of COVID. I always feel like actually they could really have benefited from getting some kind of gamers on board to help them make virtual theatre, because it is so much of it's actually quite interactive as well and playable.
Yeah.
Do you think that did a good job of, I guess, appealing to new audiences and appealing to people who are online?
I think the idea of interactive theatre and online theatre will definitely widen things. And I guess it might be a plus that although traditional theatre has taken such a hit over these past couple of years, it might have opened a new avenue to reach more people. And for one thing, people who can't necessarily go to a theatre and see things, it's a way for them to still engage with all of the good of theatre without having to get there.
What do you think that theatre could do, I guess, to be more accessible, to reach out to more people who perhaps are more used to playing around with these ideas online?
I guess one of the things with that is a lot of people, the appeal for games is it's a personal thing. So, unlike in a theater where you'll have however many, sometimes hundreds of people all experiencing it together, the idea of a show that you can watch online yourself, so that you don't have that kind of intimidation of being around all the other people, would definitely appeal. But I think similarly, it would be really interesting to see gaming in a more social context. So I know when you get a lot of YouTubers and stuff who stream games online, is the closest that I could think that we have to a whole group of people watching the same game at once, in the same ways you might a theatre performance. But there are definitely elements that you don't experience if you're playing a game by yourself. Those moments in a theatre where something happens and everyone laughs or everyone gasps, and you don't get those same sorts of things. But I think it would be really nice to see that kind of response to gaming narratives.
I mean, with a lot of the virtual theatre coming out, and with more kind of game and playable ones, it does start to eventually blur the line, and particularly people start talking about involving VR between what really classes itself as theatre and what classes itself as gaming. And I suppose it can be quite a nice way to unite these things, because, for example, recorded theatre, quite often you won't necessarily be able to stream it online, although NT at Home is sort of changing that at the moment. You will have to go to a cinema and watch it at the same time as everyone else there. And I think it's keeping that social aspect present, and perhaps trying to find ways to bring it into more of a crossover between theatre and gaming, and creating that thing where everyone's making these choices. I guess there was something, and I've forgotten what it was called, but there was something where it was like you all played something at the same time and went through something at the same time, and then they at the end you all had to say what choices you made, and everyone thought, oh yeah, I made the sensible choices, I did the right thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to bring up, actually. More games these days with online being such a part of stuff. Not even online games, but so take Persona 5 for example. I think Persona 5 does it. You'll have elements where you make choices, and if you're connected to online, it will tell you how many people made each different choice, and that is a more social aspect of how other people are responding. So it's the other one I noticed that it's probably the closest kind of almost theatre response would be with Animal Crossing taking off last year. Social media was flooded with people posting pictures of their islands and how they do things and stuff like that, and it was like a collective gaming experience, which is so much more akin to theatre. But yeah, I definitely think the seeing the choices other people have made, it can be a really interesting one if you want to feel that aspect more of that you're not doing this as an isolated thing.
I think it definitely comes back to this idea of kind of audience culpability being an aspect of both of them, just to like varying degrees, obviously dependent on how much control you have over the narrative. But like you say, even if you're watching Romeo and Juliet, essentially you feel almost culpable for not telling them, not letting them know. And yeah, I think definitely something that shouldn't be lost in turning things online. And we're just getting towards the end of the time, so I'm going to ask you the last question that we're obviously building this whole series around, which is what do you wish you had known when you first started to get involved in creative industry stuff, just generally? And what do you wish you could tell people who are interested in getting involved in either gaming or in crossing between the two industries?
One of the big ones for me that kind of completely changed my life on getting involved with creative industry, which I think I wish I'd known a lot sooner, is that if you're passionate about it, there is a place for you, and also like there is so much more to these industries than so there's so much more to theatre than the actors and the directors. There's so much more to games than the people who actually make them. So from the perspective of someone who writes about games, for however many years I didn't know that that was a thing you could even do, that was an actual role. And those sorts of roles as well, not only are they a good way of engaging with something that you care about, but they can quite often help you get to know other opportunities and those sorts of things. So yeah, I guess basically it's just that there's a role out there that, to actually sit and look at all the different aspects, as you said yourself, not knowing necessarily what a stage manager did. I think we need more kind of awareness on and everyone that goes into these sorts of industries, because it's so much easier to find a place when you have it laid out in front of you.
Industry transparency, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much to anyone who has watched this. And if you are interested in finding out about more aspects of the creative industries, talking more about the crossovers between different art forms, or just figuring out what you don't know yet and what you're going to wish you knew in 2 years' time, please have a look through our YouTube, have a look through our Twitter, and join the Facebook group to hopefully help us to make the creative industries more transparent for everyone looking to get into it. And thank you very much, Max. It's been really wonderful interviewing you.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for watching.